Hello there, AP World students. Let's learn all about Unit 4, the Maritime Empires. The empires that are all about ships and the sea and all that stuff. Here we go, let's do it. Oh, gotta click this button. Alright, so it's all about the boats, kids. It's the ocean, it's where it's at. Get in the Navy game. And the major context for this period of world history is that the Ottoman Turks and the Gunpowder Empires, they still controlled the land-based routes to Europe, and they controlled most of the Silk Road trade that way. So Europeans had this big idea, what if we go around the Gunpowder Empires with boats and trade directly with China, cutting out the Gunpowder Empires entirely, making some big, big money. And that's what Europeans did, and they did it very well. And in this idea of trying to find a better sea route to China, no one was expecting that they would actually discover the Americas. And kind of the European guy who's given a lot of credit for starting this whole maritime, ocean-based adventure is a Portuguese dude named Prince Henry the Navigator. And it's really him is kind of how all this got really going and got started. And Prince Henry famously found all these information that was coming from the Silk Road, found all these Muslim inventions and stuff from all the way from China, put all that together, made a big old ship, figured out how to travel across the oceans. So give that guy the credit. All right, boomsticks. So guns are just going to become progressively more important as history goes on. And I think I can say this, at the start of this period, European weapons were inferior to Ottoman and Mughal and Safavid weapons. But as this period of history goes on, Europeans catch up, they adapt all of those weapons of their own, and then they improve upon them, and Europe will, for the vast majority of history, especially after the 1750s, be kind of like the dominating weapon culture of planet Earth. They're going to have the best guns. And as these Europeans now have these boats and they're sailing all over the world, they're going to encounter a lot of cultures and groups of people who don't have guns. And even though these European guns are still pretty terrible by modern standards, and they were probably even worse than Ottoman standards, the fact that Europeans have guns and other people don't is going to put Europeans in an incredibly more advantageous position. So, yeah, having guns, that's what it's about. Guns don't make a fight fair. There we go. Okay, now let's really focus the rest of this lesson on what was going on in the New World. So I've already filled you in on a lot of like little hints about Aztec culture and what was going on in Mexico. But let me now describe Aztec warfare for you, because I think it's a really interesting concept. The Aztecs did a very different style of war than any other culture on planet Earth. Their style of war was largely ritualistic. It had this kind of spiritual element to it. And the whole point of war in Aztec culture was not to kill your enemy. The point of war was to capture your enemy and then to sacrifice him to the gods later. It was seen as kind of culturally inappropriate to just indiscriminately kill people. The culturally appropriate thing to do was to give people's beating hearts to the sun god at the top of the temple at Tenochtitlan. And also, when soldiers were engaged in a battle, and here I've got a picture of it over here. These guys would be dressed up in fancy jaguar outfits. They'd have these wooden clubs, and it would just basically be a beating fest where these guys would go around and individually challenge other dudes to kind of a one-on-one fight. And once that one-on-one fight was resolved, the winner would take the other person over. Usually they're unconscious or like beaten really badly, taken over to their side of the battlefield. And then once the battle ends, each side takes their captives back to their home, and they treat them really well. Like, it's like, hey, I captured this guy on the battlefield yesterday. Live in my house, meet my family, hang out, what's up? And then by the time the next big festival rolled around, all the captives would be taken to the top of the Sun Temple, and one at a time their hearts would get ripped out. The question then comes down to, like, what do you do with all these dead corpses that are lacking hearts? Well, according to Aztec custom, it was seen as culturally appropriate to eat the dead bodies of those people who were sacrificed to the sun god. It was almost a religious experience to cannibalize these dead corpses. So, whole very different style of how people resolved their differences in Mexico 500 years ago. All right. And, okay, so now this is my big story today, the fall of the Aztecs, the last time these people are really going to get brought up in AP World. So even during Christopher Columbus's time, explorers heard these rumors of this great city in Mexico populated by these really rich, really wealthy warrior people. So once the Spanish king hears about this, he recruits this young commander named Hernan Cortez to find these Aztecs. And Hernan Cortez, he wrote a journal and a bunch of letters to the King of Spain during this whole experience. And from everything I can gather, I think Cortez may be the most hardcore Christian figure in this entire scope of our AP World experience. This guy was a true believer, and his first loyalty, I'll argue, was to the Pope and then to the King of Spain. Cortez's father was a general in the Reconquista, and Cortez was sort of trained his whole young life to be a knight, to fight the Muslims, to kick them out of Spain. And by the time he grew up, well, the Muslims were all out, but there was this whole new continent of unbelievers and unfaithful people. And Cortez is going to take that energy with him to the New World and spread the word of Christ with the sword if necessary. Let me tell you what Cortez's men had in their advantages. So these conquistadors, these Spanish conquerors, were armed with early guns, horses, attack dogs, steel armor, and swords. And of course, they didn't play by the rules of combat. As they adventure through Mexico, more and more of these guys with wooden clubs try to challenge them to one-on-one fights, and Cortez will just slice them open with his sword or just blow them away with a gun. The technology differences between the early Mexicans, the Aztecs, and the Spaniards is just immense. It's the equivalent of like space aliens invading our Earth today. You know, they have this crazy technology in movies like Independence Day, and it's like, oh man, we can't even fight back against them. And it was that same experience in Mexico 500 years ago. If you want a sort of a theoretical study of what would happen if a alien force came down from outer space and conquered planet Earth, it would be probably a similar experience to what happened to the Aztecs. An interesting thing that I read a book a couple years back, and the Aztecs, they actually weren't too freaked out about guns or steel or swords or just these white people. The thing that really freaked them out were the horses and the armored war dogs. Check out this picture right here. The Spaniards, they put like spikes and chains on these big giant dogs and trained them how to hunt down dudes and take them out. And the Aztecs they've never seen horses before. They've never seen dogs before. They were seriously freaked out. And I would wonder if in this theoretical invasion from outer space, usually in the movies, you don't really see the aliens having like trained animals to work for them, and that would probably happen in a realistic invasion scenario from another world. And I'll even add this in here. I added this in recently. The experience the Spaniards had in Mexico was they were playing the video game Among Us, but the imposter had a 0-second cooldown, and they could just kill people indiscriminately. And that's basically what happened. It was not a fair fight for the Aztecs at all. And that's why Cortez came in there with just 200 guys, and they were playing a video game on God mode. Okay, it's pretty messed up. Moving on. The other thing that was definitely in Cortez's advantage was even before Spaniards ever got to mainland Mexico, the diseases that Columbus and his men brought over were traveling faster than the explorers even were. Because I'm sure that when Columbus landed on those islands in the Caribbean, they had some little trades going with other groups, and the disease just spread like wildfire. So when Cortez and his men got to Mexico, they kept coming to village after village where just almost everybody was dead with these diseases. And Cortez and his men justified it in their head. They said like, this disease has been sent by God because they're unbelievers, they're not true Christians, they do human sacrifice, they deserve it. But in reality, and I mean, Cortez and his men had no idea that the Spanish were the ones who brought the disease with them in the first place. So yeah, pretty hardcore stuff. All right, and Cortez actually also got super duper lucky in his adventures through Mexico. He met this young girl named Donna Maria. He would later father some children with her. And Donna Maria, she had encountered some of, I don't know if it was Christopher Columbus's guys, but she encountered some other Spanish explorers when she was really young. She learned the Spanish language, and she also knew like 5 languages spoken all over Mexico. So she was his translator, his guide. She told him how to get to Tenochtitlan, and she came from one of these smaller tribes that the Aztecs had beat up and stolen human sacrifices from for many hundreds of years. So Cortez is like, girl, I got you. Let's find these Aztec people. Let's take them down. Okay, and another interesting thing is that as Cortez was marching his way towards central Mexico, he discovered a lot of these smaller tribes, and he really was hardcore about his whole Christianity thing. He said, all of you will become Christians or I will kill you. And a lot of these smaller tribes were like, whoa, like, we still believe in our gods, we want to do human sacrifice, and Cortez is like, I don't care, I will take you all out right now too. So he used a lot of violence and intimidation to bring these more tribes over to his side, and he did sort of force Christianity on these people through some incredibly violent ways. All right, so eventually Cortez gets to the main city, this giant city of Tenochtitlan, this island city. By all accounts, it was really beautiful, other than the giant temple where people's hearts got ripped out every day. When Cortez got there, he had an army of maybe about 600 men of kind of mixed natives and his Spanish forces. Montezuma, the last king of the Aztecs, I'm going to argue he made a big mistake. He was really curious about these Spaniards and their foreign animals and their fancy weapons. So he actually invited them into the city and said, y'all can be my honored guests. You can live in my palace with me. And for about a month, Cortez and his men wandered around Tenochtitlan. They talked a lot with the Aztec king. They tried to come up with some trade deals, see if something could be worked out. During this time period, Cortez wrote a whole lot of letters about the things he saw, and so those have all survived in history. Give us a very good idea of what Tenochtitlan looked like. But of course, we're getting it through the perspective of a very hardcore Christian guy, and he has a lot of strong opinions about what he sees. But anyway, so after hanging out in Tenochtitlan for about a month, some Spanish soldiers witness a human sacrifice ritual. I think it was one of these big festivals was coming up. So the Spanish soldiers had a huge problem with them killing people for their god. So the Spanish soldiers decided to kill people for their god. Okay, like they said, y'all are anti-Christians, so we're gonna kill you. And it started this violence started a riot, and this riot eventually, this huge mob of the Aztecs surrounded the palace and demanded that the king kick out all these foreigners for stopping a sacrifice ritual. They thought it was totally unholy and against their faith, which according to them it definitely was. So Cortez then starts using treachery to get what he wants. He breaks into Montezuma's room, puts a gun to Montezuma's head, and says, Montezuma, you're going to allow us safe passage to get out of this city, or I'm going to shoot you. And then Montezuma walks out in front of his palace, and there's this huge crowd of people, and he tries to calm them down, and he says, like, let's just let the Spanish leave peacefully. Let's let them take some stuff with them. Please don't bother them. And the crowd is clearly getting very violent. And one person in the crowd throws a rock at Montezuma, hits Montezuma in the temple, and Montezuma immediately dies. And then without a hostage, the whole crowd charges into the temple, and Cortez and his men slice their way through the crowd, and they eventually escape Tenochtitlan. And then a couple months later, Cortez, Cortez then, as soon as he escapes Tenochtitlan, he sends out some letters to the other Spaniards in the New World, says, everybody come here, we got to mass up, we got to take these people down, they got a bunch of gold. And he rallies this giant army. He surrounds the city of Tenochtitlan, blows up their bridges, starts assaulting them with giant cannons. And these Aztecs have never seen cannons before, and they completely destroy the city of Tenochtitlan. The few people that did survive Tenochtitlan, Cortez ordered them to take apart the city brick by brick, and a lot of the pieces of the city actually filled in the lake that surrounded Tenochtitlan. And as soon as they were done taking apart, especially the giant temple of human sacrifice, Cortez ordered them to build a church on top of it. And that church is still there today. And he also decided to rename this city Mexico City. And it's one of the largest cities in the Americas, even to this day. I just think it's super interesting that if you went to Mexico City today and you brought a shovel with you, and if you just dug down, 6 feet or so, you would undoubtedly find some of the remains of Tenochtitlan and the Aztec culture, literally built on top of their city. So pretty cool stuff. Okay, and the Inca civilization, the other really big civilization in the Americas, it fell for basically the same story. I'm going to argue that what happened to the Incas was even more brutal and savage than what happened to the Aztecs. There's a really great extra credits series about it. I'm not going to get into it too much, but there definitely involves a room full of gold and some serious hardcore Christian guys who betray not only the king of the Incas, but they eventually betray each other. Look, there I am. I'm just spoiling everything. I'm a terrible teacher, but it's history. You can look it up yourselves. Okay, so yeah, the Inca, they fall for the same reasons. Okay, and the wealth of the Aztecs and the Incas, it's going to inspire just every European country to get involved with the New World. Spain was so wildly successful in discovering these easy-to-conquer civilizations. Every other European power is going to have this belief that somewhere in North America or somewhere in the Amazon rainforest, a whole nother civilization could be waiting for them, and it could be packed full of gold and make them all really rich. That doesn't happen, so they're going to be a little disappointed about that. So every European power starts this giant race to sort of lay claim to the New World. In the beginning, the Pope really tries to be the referee of this whole thing. He creates something called the Treaty of Tordesillas that sort of like tries to divide up the world into zones of control. But the Pope's calls are going to get largely ignored, and the New World will be this free-for-all kind of place. It's definitely the Pirates of the Caribbean times, because you guys probably never made that connection in like the Pirates of the Caribbean films and in that sort of concept. It was because the whole New World was so lawless. There really wasn't any solid control over the various islands of the Caribbean and the ports of the New World. It was also new and unexplored. So if you were a savvy ship captain, you could definitely get away with committing crime on the high seas, and not too many people would be there to stop you. All right, I'll save this for the next video. Peace out.